Hello, and welcome to another edition of Energize Your Next Presentation. My name is Glenn Anderson. I am a professional speaker. I focus on topics like teamwork, team building, collaboration, communication skills, presentation skills, and team leadership. And today, in this episode, I am talking about one of my very favorite subjects when I talk about presentation skills: how not to be boring. Folks, holding the attention of your audience and keeping them from being bored is a question of power. The answer to most attention problems, folks, is power. Speakers have power. You, as a speaker, have power. Think about it. When you're giving a presentation, you're standing up in front of a room full of people. You're probably standing, they're sitting, they're looking at you, you're doing the talking, they're listening to you. Perhaps if you're up on a stage, you have even more power. If you've got a microphone, you've got even more power. If you're in a spotlight, you've got even more power. Speakers have power. Think about it. If you're up in front of a room giving a presentation and a group of aliens from outer space landed outside the building and walked into the room where you're giving a presentation, who would they think is in charge? You are. You look like you're in charge. You're up in front of the room. You have power. So the question is, how can you use that power as a speaker to keep your audience from becoming bored? I've got 6 ideas that I want to share with you today. The first one is set the pace of your presentation. People love rhythm. This is why the drummer is such an important part of a band. People love rhythm. And so this is why presentations like top 5 ways to be more productive, top 10 ideas to help your processes work better, 7 habits of highly effective people. People love those kind of titles because it tells them in the title what the rhythm of the presentation is going to be. If the presentation is called Top 5 Ways to Improve Your Productivity, and the audience knows it's a 45-minute presentation, then they know the rhythm. You've given them the rhythm. 45 minutes, 5 different things they're going to share, the speaker's going to share about how to be more productive. That's the rhythm. Now, even if the title of your presentation doesn't have a number in it like that, you've got an agenda at the beginning. Perhaps you put up an agenda and you say, here's the 5 things that I'm going to cover. And people go, okay, it's a 60-minute presentation. The speaker's got 5 main points. They understand the rhythm. So you have set the pace. But once you've done that, don't break the rhythm. Folks, if you have 5 ways to be more productive and 50 minutes into a 1 hour presentation, you're only on the second point, then you have broken that rhythm that the audience was expecting and they are bored. So set the pace, set the rhythm, and then stick to it. And that will keep your audience engaged. That's my first idea. Second idea, direct the attention. People want to know, where should the attention be focused? When you say things like, let me tell you a story, let me give you an example, oh, boom, the audience snaps right back to attention. They go, oh, the speaker's going to tell a story. I want to hear this story. It directs the attention. One of the things that drives me crazy when I'm listening to a speaker present is when they have PowerPoint or some kind of charts and they put up a chart on the screen and then they turn and start speaking to the audience and they're ignoring the chart that is on the screen. It's like it's hanging behind them like wallpaper. And the audience doesn't know what to do, especially if your chart has some bullets. So this chart has gone up on the screen. There's bullets up there on the screen. but you as the speaker are turned away from the screen. You're talking to the audience. You're not saying anything about the bullets that are behind you on the screen. And the audience doesn't know what to do. They're reading the bullets. Is the speaker talking about the bullets? Which bullet are they talking about now? And this is what makes PowerPoint or other presentations like that so mind numbing is this goes on screen after screen after screen, and the audience doesn't know where they should be directing the attention. Should they be listening to the speaker? Should be looking at the screen. So if you're going to use visuals, PowerPoint or some other kind of visuals, and you've got them up on the screen, then use them. Point to the bullets. Talk about what's on the screen. If you've got a picture, an example, a configuration, a spreadsheet, something like that is up on the screen, use it. It's a visual aid. You're giving a presentation and you've created a chart as a visual aid. So direct the attention of the audience to the visual aid and use it. So folks, when you're not doing this, when that screen is just sitting there next to you and you're ignoring it, this wears out the audience and the audience gets bored. Your power as a speaker is to direct the attention of the audience. Here's another idea. Play the part. You are a star. You're up in front of the audience. Those people have chosen to come and sit and listen to you give a presentation. You're the focus, as we talked about. You've got the power. You're a star. So act like it. So if you're up in front and you're kind of clumsy and you've kind of forgotten what you should be talking about and you're fumbling around and you keep dropping your notes and you knock over your glass of water and you're not sure how to use the microphone, or maybe you've got one of those lavaliers kind of clipped to your shirt and it keeps falling off, you don't look like a star. And when these kind of fumblings and bumblings keep going on, the audience gets bored. Practice. Practice with the technology. Practice with your charts. Practice with a microphone. Practice with how you're going to stand in front of the room and give the presentation. Rehearse. Just like a star actor rehearses before they play a part in a play or a movie or a TV show. Folks, play the part. Whether you want to believe it or not, you are a star. And that's part of your power as a speaker. Know what happens next. If you've got a slide clicker like this in your hand and you're getting ready to push that button, folks, no one else in that room except you knows what's going to happen when you push that button. And that is power. That is your power as a speaker, and you need to use that power. So how do you use that power? You use it by having good transitions. That is, you have practiced in advance. You're saying the words that are going to lead into the next chart. So when you push the button, it's a nice seamless flow into that next chart that comes up on the screen. That's the power you have as a speaker if you know what happens next. But have you ever seen a speaker, they push the button and they kind of look over at the screen and they go, whoa, where did that chart come from? That's a speaker who hasn't practiced. They haven't prepared in advance. They don't know what happens next. And that's fumbling around again, and the audience is going to get bored. So if you've got a series of charts and you're using that clicker to move through those charts, practice. Create nice, smooth transitions and know what happens next. And the only way you can know what happens next is when you have practiced enough that you remember what happens each time you push that button. Because when you do that, you're using your power as a speaker. No one else in the room knows what's going to happen but you when you push that button. That's power. Get the audience involved. I mean, this is pretty obvious, but if there's any way that you can create interaction, add interaction into your presentation, this is going to keep your audience from becoming bored. And as the chart here says, I'm not just talking about little cutesy icebreakers. I'm talking about serious interaction that relates to your presentation, that relates to the topic that you're talking about. So this little picture here up on top, point A is where your audience is at the beginning of your presentation, and you flow through to point B, which is where you want your audience to be when you have finished your presentation. And in this example here, the presentation has 4 key points that you're working through: 1, 2, 3, 4. And as the picture illustrates, you need to find some ways to include some interactive elements with your audience as you move through those 4 points from point A to point B. So here's some examples. Obviously, one of the most obvious ones is simply getting a Q&A, a question and answer thing going with your audience. Now, notice it says here during the presentation, not at the very end. If you were with me back in one of the earlier episodes of this series that we're doing, I talked about how to create a strong closing. And one of the things I talked about in there is not having Q&A be the very, very last thing that you do. Because what happens then is you're doing a Q&A with individuals in the audience, and other people are getting bored and they think the presentation's over, so they get up and they leave, and it's not a strong way to end. We talked about that earlier. But having Q&A during the presentation or a few charts before the end is obviously a very typical way to get interaction going with your audience. Now, you, as a speaker, you need to think about this in advance. Are you willing to be interrupted at any point in the presentation? You're always available to take a question if someone raises their hand? Or would you rather move through parts of the presentation and then pause perhaps after every point and take questions? Or maybe you really want to wait all the way until near the end and then pause for questions. Well, you need to decide as a speaker what's most comfortable to you. And then you need to tell the audience in advance, I'm going to pause at the end of each section, and then we'll take some questions. So Q&A, obviously a great way to add interaction. Another way to do it is you asking the audience specific questions about your topic. You know, often the speaker just kind of defaults to saying something like, are there any questions? And maybe that'll get some interaction from the audience, maybe not. Well, a great way to get interaction from the audience is to ask them a specific question. Folks, where do you think the biggest challenge is going to be as you try to implement this process that I've just described to you? You're asking them a specific question, asking them to answer that question. For this to work, obviously, you need to have come up with these specific questions. So this becomes part of the development of your presentation. As you're creating the presentation, as you're developing those 4 points in my example here, you stop and you think, at this point, I could ask them a specific question about what I've just covered and get them involved. So another way to add interaction. Maybe you ask the audience to write down a list. You know, pull out your phone, folks, pull out a little piece of paper and make a list of the 3 or 4 challenges that you're going to face when you try to go back to your office and implement what we've just talked about. Maybe you ask the audience to interact. Turn to the person next to them and do some kind of interaction. I've described to you before how I have a background studying and performing improvisational comedy. And so I have some little improv games that 2 people can play together that make some of the points I'm making along the way in regards to collaboration and team building and listening skills and things like that. And so several times during a presentation, I might ask the audience to turn to the person sitting next to them, get a partner, or maybe 2 or 3 people if it's an odd number of people in an area of the room. And then I give them a little exercise to do with those other people. So asking the audience to interact with the person next to them, great way to add some interaction. Maybe you use the whole audience to solve a problem together. So you put something up on the screen, a configuration, a process flow, a spreadsheet, and you say, okay, folks, what's wrong here? What are the problems here? What's going to keep this from being successful? You get a discussion going. You solve a problem that you put up in front of them together. Videos are always a nice way to break up a presentation. If you have a video that fits what you're talking about, not too long, but maybe a 2 or 3, 4 minute video. Though I will tell you the challenge, one of the challenges with videos is simply the tech involved. So you need to make sure this is going to work. Is the video loaded on your laptop? Are you accessing it over the internet? Do you have a good, strong, fast internet connection? How is the sound being taken care of? Is the sound coming out of your laptop into the sound system of the room? These are all technical issues that have to be resolved in advance. Too often, I see speakers try to show a video and it just stops the presentation. It sucks the energy out of it because there's too many technical issues trying to get the video to play and hear properly. But if you can, video's a nice way to break up a presentation. Polling. There's a lot of cool technology these days where you can have the audience pull out their cell phones and go to a specific website and you ask them questions and they answer the questions on their phone and the results come up on the screen. You can see what the whole room is thinking. Really cool stuff. This also works particularly well in a virtual presentation when it's really hard to try to get that remote audience involved. And so you build a polling question into your presentation, and each person, each remote person, no matter where they are, answers the question. The results come up on the screen. Again, kind of helps the audience feel like they're connected and interacting, even though it's a virtual remote presentation. And similarly, often the only way that you can really interact with a remote audience is through the chat window. So if you're hoping for people to ask questions through the virtual chat window, or you're hoping for them to make comments through the chat window, you need to kind of encourage them to discover and use the chat window. So I've seen speakers before, maybe in the couple minutes before the presentation officially starts, you're asking the audience, hey, where are you today? Type it into the chat window, what city you're in, and you as the speaker kind of read off the answers. And so this does a couple things. It helps people discover where the chat window is and how to use it. And it also kind of makes them comfortable using the chat window. So hopefully once you get into the presentation, they'll be willing and comfortable to use the chat window to ask a question. So these are just a bunch of ideas of adding interaction. But again, going back to this theme of keeping the audience from becoming bored, using your power as a speaker, getting the audience involved through any of these number of ways that I've just suggested to you is a way to make sure the audience is not falling asleep. They're not getting bored. Then finally, my last idea, always end early, or at least end on time. Think about it. Have you ever been in the audience of a presentation and you know that it was supposed to end at the top of the hour and the speaker just keeps on going? They don't seem to have any idea what time it is, or they don't seem to be moving towards a conclusion. And what's happening? The audience isn't listening anymore. They got one foot out the door. They're looking at their watch. They're trying to figure out, when is this going to end so I can get out of here? And so if you've gone on beyond when you're supposed to end, I'm telling you, the audience is bored. They're not listening anyway. So you really need to plan out. And we talked about this in one of the earlier episodes of this series on how to manage the amount of content that you have so that you'll end on time, or even better, end a couple minutes early. Don't you love the speaker that wraps things up a couple minutes early? You're not bored, you're happy. So these are 6 ideas that I give to you today to use your power as a speaker to not be boring. Set the pace. People love rhythm, and then stick to it. Direct their attention. Use the visual aids that you've created direct their attention to them. Play the part. Make sure you're practiced and comfortable and rehearsed. You're a star. Make sure you know when you push that button what's going to happen next on the screen. That's power. Get the audience involved with some manner of interaction, and then make sure you wrap up a couple minutes early or end certainly on time. 6 ideas to use your power as a speaker to keep your audience from becoming bored. I've shared this list with you in the other episodes that we've done here in this webinar series. Some great books if you want to read a little more. If you want to read something really kind of fun and entertaining, the 4th book there, Confessions of a Public Speaker, really a fun and entertaining book by a guy who's a professional speaker, speaks at a lot of conferences and events. A lot of great stories, very entertaining book. And then some websites. And again, I would call your attention to the last one there, speakerhub.com/skillcamp. Hundreds of short little videos or articles to read that are all about all the different ways that you can become a better public speaker, a better presenter. So to wrap this up, use your power as a speaker to provide inspiration, information, insight. I've talked about this before. I really believe that if your presentation inspires your audience in some way, appropriately and accurately shares the information that you want to give them, and you add some personal insight, if you always have these 3 elements in your presentation, your audience is going to get value from your presentation. And then to add to that today, the 6 ideas I've given you to use your power as a speaker to keep them from being bored, you will be a successful public speaker. And I end with this quote. I've talked about this before. They may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And more than maybe anything else I've talked about in this series, these 6 ideas I've given you today are going to make your audience feel great. They're not going to be bored, and they're going to get value from your presentation. My contact information is down in the lower right-hand corner there. I would love to hear from you if you've got questions or comments on what I've talked about here today. But thank you very much for tuning in to energize your next presentation. My name is Glenn Anderson. Thanks for listening.